Hey there, podcast friends. Thanks for listening. Here's the installment of my fifth chapter of the book, Outdoing Jesus. Read it live on Facebook and here. I had actually forgotten to start the recording, so I'm going to re-record the beginning of this, and then you pick up. By the way, I end up with a little choking attack in the middle of this. So there's a couple of times where I take a drink, and my throat gets all verklempt. Not because I'm emotional. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I just don't. I'm not crying. Why do you think I'm crying? My throat, I don't know. I've just got this scratchy, dry throat today, but not a cough, so fear not. All right, so I'm going to read the beginning and then pick you up into the rest of it. So you know that the Gospel of John is the center of this book. The phrase that Jesus uses, those who believe in me will do the works that I'm doing and do even greater works than these. That sits at the heart of this book. And there are 7 miraculous signs. The one we're going to read tonight is the second. It is the 5th chapter of my book. It comes from chapter 4 of the Gospel of John, but it's the second miraculous sign. So if you're keeping track by numbers, good luck. But there's something about, and if you want to listen to the earlier podcast, you can listen to this, that it's my theory that the Gospel of John is trying to tell a very particular story in a very particular way to tell a creation of the new way of humanity story. That what you see in Jesus are miraculous signs pointing to the way of humanity. Not signs that are breaking the laws of physics, but signs that are meant to break open human potential. And what we see is Jesus as the Son of God and the brother of all of humanity. And it's this call that calls us forward to say that what we see in Jesus and these miracles, people are doing now and they're outdoing, and that's the way it's supposed to be. The whole point, I think, of the Gospel of John including that phrase, those who believe in me will do the works I'm doing and do even greater works than these, is so that we will open up our understanding of Jesus not as the miraculous exception, but as the magnificent rule. So I attach a pattern of humanity to each one of these chapters. I call this one empathy, and it's that time things broke good is the title of the chapter. All right, and here's the reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verses 46 to 54. Jesus returned to Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. In Capernaum, there was a certain royal official whose son was sick. When he heard that Jesus was coming from Judea to Galilee, he went out to meet him to ask if Jesus would come with him to heal his son, for his son was about to die. Jesus said to him, "Unless you see miraculous signs and wonders, you won't believe." The royal official said to him, "Lord, come before my son dies." Jesus replied, "Go home, your son lives." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and set out for his home. While he was on his way, his servants were already coming to meet him. They said, "Your son lives." So he asked them, "At what time did he start getting better?" And they said, "Well, the fever left him yesterday about 1 o'clock in the afternoon." Then the father realized that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son lives." And he and his entire household believed in Jesus. This was the second miraculous sign Jesus did while going from Judea to Galilee. That's John chapter 4, 46, 54. Now into the chapter. Perhaps like me, you're struck by the strangeness of the end of that passage. This was the second miraculous sign that Jesus performed. It seems a bit odd that this story that is so filled with action that the narrator wants to bring the reader back to the miraculous sign count. It might seem odd, or it might be a genius way for the storyteller to remind us that there's something important going on with the selection of these stories and the number of them. When we consider that the author selected these stories used in the Gospel of John with a specific agenda in mind, we can see how this rather strange-sounding aside serves as a clue to the intentionality of the story selection. The phrase miraculous signs is one of those clues that has alerted scholars and careful readers to the use of numerical devices to connect the gospel to the Genesis creation story with its 7 days structure. Also, this story is one of only 3 miraculous signs of healing in the gospel. Some are surprised that the Gospel of John contains only 3 healing stories. Many people assume that the majority of the miraculous signs of Jesus are healings. And while that may be true in the Gospel of Matthew and Mark and Luke, In John, healings make up not quite half. Jeez, I'm all over the place. Not quite half of the miraculous signs. This is not to take anything away from the importance of healings or the significance of the particular sign. But when there is a healing in the Gospel of John, it tends to be a doozy. And that is indeed the case with this one. There's an almost understated feel to this story. At first reading, all the layers of significance could easily be missed. This is a story in which a tremendous amount of meaning is conveyed in very simple phrases. While the story centers around the healing of a young boy with a fever, this story contains multiple, quote, breakings. Breaking fevers, breaking social boundaries, and breaking expectations. All three of these breakings are meaningful for us as we consider the implications for the new way of humanity. Subtitle, chapter title, Breaking Fevers. While breaking the young boy's fever is the first dilemma, the story gives no detail about the fever other than that it was of the life-threatening nature. The lack of specificity allows this story to connect with the universal experience of sick children from around the world. While children dying of fevers is incredibly rare in the United States where I live and is decreasing numerically around the world, it remains the leading cause of death for children around the globe. Fevers are wickedly dangerous to children. So it's clear why this boy's father was willing to go to anyone who might be able to help him, make any sacrifice, take on any new belief to save his child. This is the emotional setting of the story. We're drawn by the desperation of a father seeking hope. He's chasing the rumors that he's heard of a wandering healer from a town of Cana, a day's walk away. Maybe word had gotten out about the wine incident from the wedding there, or perhaps he had heard other stories. Cana makes sense as the place where he would go because it seems to be Jesus' hometown. In fact, Cana is mentioned more than any other place other than Jerusalem in the Gospel of John. Jesus' family seems to be there. He goes to a wedding there. Some of his disciples are from there. People would know that they could find Jesus in Cana. This interaction between Jesus and the Father, it's a really short one. Jesus speaks only 15 words in the entire engagement. 5 of them are, "Go home, your son lives." And even odder is the 10-word statement, "Unless you see miraculous signs and wonders, you won't believe." Jesus says this just after the father asked him to accompany him to his hometown to heal his son. It seems like an odd thing to say to a desperate man who's just asked you to use your power to save his son's life. We meet Jesus speaking to all those around him, so they will know that they need to pay attention to these signs to understand what Jesus' agenda is all about. The message Jesus shares, good golly. I have a dry throat today, but not a dry cough, so don't worry. The message Jesus shares with those around him is, unless you are able to see the larger story of the way of humanity and God through a miraculous sign, you will not believe, and then you will not find life in this way. You see, Jesus is changing hearts and minds about God, humanity, and the story of life. He's not simply solving individual problems of wine shortages or illness or blindness or any of the other particular complexities of these miracle stories. The healing of the fever is almost a passing event in this story. Jesus simply declares to the father that his son lives. Then, a day later, the father learns that the declaration was a true one. Among the teachings in this story is that of ongoing belief in the absence of knowing. As impressive as the healing miracle is in the Gospels are, they're limited in their overall benefit and scope. In this story, look, one boy is saved from dying from a fever. That death-preventing action, it's quite short-lived. The boy will presumably die later in life. The boy isn't transformed into some sort of superhuman mutant who is now immune from all fevers and who will never be vulnerable to illness again. Yet this does not take away from the meaningfulness of the story, even as it shows how limited it is. What is more impressive than the one-time healing of one boy is the work of those who have sought to change the circumstances in which children get sick with fevers that lead to death. In each miracle, we meet Jesus calling us to do even greater works. In this one, everything from saving one boy from a fever to changing the health conditions so that kids don't get fevers in the first place. Saving children's lives is not only right for the children and their families, but also critical for the survival of humanity. In the last 200 years, the rate at which children have died worldwide has decreased significantly. Here's some statistics. In 1800, 43% of the world's newborns died before their 5th birthday. In 1960, child mortality for those under the age of 5 was still 18.5%. In 2015, it was down to 4.3%. The development of vaccines has changed the narrative from working to break fevers to preventing them around the world. In my lifetime alone, we have seen the eradication or near eradication of the kinds of diseases that have killed millions of children, including smallpox, whooping cough, measles, tuberculosis, rind pest, polio, Guyana worm disease, tetanitis, malaria, and the deadly Hib disease. Modern medicine has played a significant role in the reduction of child mortality, and we should be proud of these incredible medical accomplishments. But the more substantial reason for the global reduction in child mortality rates, from nearly half of children dying before the age of 5 to fewer than 1 in 25, it came from the change in infrastructure and specifically sanitation. New approaches in urban planning, water supplies, and farmers' growing patterns, as well as the work being done by civil engineers, nutritionists, and sanitation workers, have brought us the greatest amount of healing the world has ever seen. The global ability to provide food that is not contaminated and water that is fit to drink and to dispose properly of human waste has changed entire countries and human civilization. It's easy to think that people who work the back of a sanitation truck or dig a well or maintain a sewer system are doing some kind of menial work. But that's anything but miraculous. But these modern day miracle workers are not only keeping children from dying of fevers, they're also keeping them from getting sick in the first place. One of those modern day miracle workers is the Caribou Loo Company in Nairobi. Caribou means welcome in Swahili, and loo is the English word for bathroom, which is well understood due to Nairobi's colonial British past. So the company's name means welcome toilet, Caribou Loo. It's perfect. Caribou Loo provides what we in the United States would call portable bathrooms. Those little hard plastic structures that often feel like a total last resort to many of us. In many parts of the world, they are a tremendous upgrade, not only for the dignity of privacy that is provided, but also for the sanitation and the health benefits. Its bright red color well identifies the Caribou Loo brand. These standout loos have made an incredible difference in Nairobi. Many places in Nairobi don't have permanent toilets, such as where people have football matches or where villagers hold their celebrations and weddings and school meetings. Where there are people, there's a need for a loo. So these bright red plastic huts are keeping water clean, hands clean, and stomachs free of infection. This is the result of having safe, consistent, and clean portable sanitation. I met one of the founders of Caribou Loo at a fun run conducted by the, get a load of this, Portable Sanitation Association International, PSAI. The fact that there's an international association for those who provide portable sanitation tells you how important this service is globally. The PSAI was holding an annual conference in conjunction with World Toilet Day on November 19th. Yep, you read that right. World Toilet Day. Let me tell you, these people take the power of the toilet seriously, and they should. The toilet has literally been a lifesaver for millions of people. The World Toilet Day website has a quote from the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. "We have the tools. Let's make it happen." The it there is a worldwide goal of everyone having access to a household toilet by 2030. Pause and think about that for a minute. It's people working really hard internationally all over the world to be sure that every household has access to a toilet by 2030. People around the world are working hard to bring sanitation to everyone on the planet. That is a greater things kind of goal. If you're looking for some inspiration today, go to worldtoiletday.info website. Frankly, you should all just stop right now and go to it and start reading that instead of listening to this. Totally worth it. There you will find inspiring stories, mind-bending details on the flow of poo across the planet, and more details than you can imagine about human waste, including a link to the WHO UNICEF Joint Monitoring Program for Water Supply, Sanitation, and Hygiene report on the progress of drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. I mean, perfect. These people know their business. Oh, and they don't miss a chance at a potty pun. But don't be fooled by their good nature attitude. They are sanitation serious. Inspired by the health benefits of sanitation, the people at Caribou Lou have expanded their business opportunities to help fund the education of the most impoverished kids in Nairobi. All profits from their sanitation business go to fund education and support children in a slum who are affected by HIV and AIDS. In fact, my daughter works for that organization. You should totally go and look it up. A cursory reading of the story of the young boy with the fever might make you think that it's a story where Jesus is the hero and the young boy is the beneficiary, and there's good reason to think that. But the father of the young boy gives us a fresh understanding of why this story is included in the gospel and what the point to it is. Before the breaking of the fever, another kind of breaking was needed. The breaking of social barriers, designed to keep someone like the father of the boy away from someone like Jesus. It might be easy to miss the importance of a man who was part of, quote, the Roman military system, traveling to another village and seeking out a Jewish mystic and asking him for a favor. This kind of engagement meant breaking all sorts of cultural and ethical barriers of the first century. We see from the way the story is told how significant this interaction was from the very start. The story's setting was dramatic. When a Roman soldier approached a Jewish man, any encounter between the two was by definition riddled with tension, power dynamics, and danger. While this is a short story, there's significant meaning packed into the phrase, in Capernaum, there was a certain royal official whose son was sick. When he heard that Jesus was coming from Judea to Galilee, he went out to meet him and ask him if he would come and heal his son, for his son was about to die. The term royal official, it conveyed that this man was not a Jew, but a Gentile, and that had power. The Jewish people were under occupation by these Romans. We still see similar settings around the world where distinctions are made between people. The distinctions of Jews from Gentiles was not the kind of discrimination that people had a choice about, or where making out their own bigotry or they were working out their own bigotry or personal fear. The separation was rooted in the identity of both groups, and could be traced to a time when the Israelites were in exile in Babylon. Being a people of their own and not melting into the culture of the Babylonians were required for the Israelites to survive. And survival is among the most powerful motives for tribal distinction. This is the thing about tribal, ethnic, religious separation. People are rarely engaged in it as a matter of just personal choice. This isn't unique to the Jews and Gentiles of the first century. It's been part of the human experience. To be human is to be tribal. It is our biases and prejudice and tribal assumptions that Jesus calls all of us to set aside for something greater. Credit should be given to this Gentile father. He was the first to make a move to cross the boundary. Perhaps it was the power of a father's love for his son, or the official traveled more than a day to Cana to find a man whom he had only heard a rumor of his miraculous doings. The father was at the end of his rope. In the text, we meet a man with no options. If you don't come now, my son will die. You can feel the burden, the pain that it takes for a father to leave his son, and the desperation involved in going to a man from a lesser culture to ask for help. Overcoming culturally assumed distance between the men put both of them at risk. There was significant risk for the father to go for help from what he must have thought was a wandering Jewish mystic of whom he had only heard these rumors. And this was risky for Jesus and his followers as well. For he was not only helping a Gentile, but he was also giving the enemy aid in this system. He was bringing life to a boy who would grow up and become part of the enemy force. What we see in both men is an act of empathy. Jesus was drawn by the Father into his situation. The Father was drawn into Jesus' land because of the need, because he needed what Jesus offered. These two were affecting each other. This is not a story of Jesus wanting to step over the Gentile boundary, but a story of the humanity of one pulling Jesus to the other side of that boundary. Willingly, I might add, still, Jesus seems to be at the mercy of the reality he is living in. This is what connection with another person creates, a pull over the line. In this story, you can see the truth of the idea that you cannot be human while still violating the humanity of another. Perhaps you know the story of Mohammed Guled and Marcus Luttrell. It too is a story of two men connecting with each other's shared humanity over cultural boundaries. Luttrell, he was a part of the United States Special Forces team in Afghanistan. On June 27, 2005, his unit came under attack, and he was separated from his unit and significantly injured. After a number of days, he was discovered by Mohammed Guled. Mohammed was part of the Pashtun clan that lived in the area, so he took Marcus into his home, fed him, kept him safe, and helped him heal under the teaching of the Pashtwali, an unwritten ethical code that governs the Pashtuns people as a means of, quote, the way of the Pashtuns, or the code of life. Mohammed Guled understood that obligation to mean that he was to care for Marcus Luttrell as his most honored guest. Rumors started to spread around the village that there was an American soldier who had been wounded and was being kept safe. One of the commanders of the Afghan insurgency made a public call for Marcus to be turned over to him by saying, Pashtunwali does not extend to helping oppressors and infidel aggressors such as the American soldier who is an enemy of Islam. Mohammed Guled, on the other hand, and his entire family were at risk of retaliation for aiding the enemy. But Mohammed said, we did not rescue Marcus for money or privileges. By rescuing him and keeping him safe for 5 nights in our home, we were doing our cultural obligation. This, quote, cultural obligation is another way of saying we were fulfilling our way of life. At its core, it was about caring for and protecting another human life, even if that life was one of your declared enemies. This is what matches the life and the teachings of Jesus. This is what we see in the story of the father of a sick son and Jesus, that it's possible to see the differences and for that difference to be a means of connection rather than a means of separation. In many ways, we see in the Mohammed Guled Marcus Luttrell story a kind of rhyming with the story of the father of the sick boy and Jesus. In this story, the father of the sick boy, we see a vision of the new humanity as the father walked into the unknown places to seek out the other, whom he believed could have a gift for his son. It was the father who first saw God in the other. This man was convinced that he could be a part of what God was doing in the life of Jesus and held out hope that that could change his son. That is the kind of faith of the new humanity. To see in the other that which we need. Perhaps that is what prompted Jesus to say, your faith has already healed your son. I really apologize for this. I'm not emotionally choked up, just quite literally choking up. So pardon me for that. Breaking expectation, or the God boxes. There's a third breaking in this story, the breaking of expectations, setting God free from the confines of Jesus. There's an exciting interaction that happens in this story. See, the Father wants Jesus to go with him. Excuse me a second. The Father wants Jesus to go with him to his house so that he can heal his son. But Jesus doesn't go to his house. Instead, Jesus declares the boy's healing from a distance. Go home. Your son lives. The man believes him and heads home. But on the way, he meets those servants who were coming from his house, and they confirm that the fever broke at the time that the man was talking with Jesus. This realization is the turning point for the entire family. When Jesus says, your son lives, the Father believes it. He becomes the first person in the Gospel of John to believe and act on his belief in the unbound God. It is as if the writer of the story wants us to see in this man a picture of humanity, not only removed from its boundaries around one another, but also removed from its boundaries around God. There's this wonderful subtext in the story where the Father wanted to bring the miracle worker to the place where the Son was for the healing to take place. You can't blame the Father for believing that that's how the works of God are bound in space and time. It's common for all of us to believe that there are some places or some people where the power of God dwells. Jesus, though, opens the story of God by essentially saying to the man, I don't need to accompany you to the place where your son is for the healing of God to be available to him. This story, as much as any we will look at, has a mystical sense of changing the expectations of space and time to it. In this story, we witness the power of God living in and through Jesus without being bound to Jesus. God is not limited to the place where Jesus is. This God without boundaries sits right at the heart of the proclamation that those who do the works that I am doing will do even greater works than these by the same power that's alive in me. All right, there it is. That's chapter 5, read to you live with choking and all the rest of that nonsense. I'm due for a real doozy of a cough here. So I'll just check Facebook, see if there's any comments, any questions. You're welcome to make them now if you like. If anybody's been watching, if you're watching this, later after it's been recorded, obviously won't do that. And I probably won't go back and, answer your comments later. Maybe sometimes I do, but I probably should. At least in this kind of scenario, I probably should do that. But all right. So if there's not anything, I will call it a night. I think that was 30 minutes or something of this. So thanks for sticking with me through the reading of Outdoing Jesus live at my little table, reading off my Kindle on my screen, and it's been a pleasure. Thanks all.